Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about the Legendary Lords of the Shadows of Change DLC, and let's rank them from the very worst to the very best that are part of this DLC. Well, in third place it is Mother Astankia of Kislev. Now, this is actually less to do about Mother Astankia herself and her campaign effects, though they certainly aren't as potent as what Yan Bo or the Changeling do have. But the issue for Mother Astankia primarily is the lack of changes for Kislev. So Kislev has a weak economy, it has issues because of that weak economy, it takes a lot more effort and a lot more buildings to get to the economic potential of other races, which means less armies on the campaign map, less choices, less options. Now, with regards to Mother Astankia, even if Kislev had been buffed, I would probably still argue she is the worst of the bunch when it comes to this DLC, though it would be a far closer race than it currently is. In terms of faction effects, she gets a global recruitment duration of -1 for Incarnate Elemental of Beast global recruitment duration. She gets winds and magic power capacity for each resource producing building, so she ends up with a significant amount of winds and magic in her campaign. She gets melee attack when fighting against armies that spread corruption, so Skaven, Norskins, Warriors of Chaos, Demons. That is decent enough, but not necessarily too important either. And melee defense for Spider Hatchlings and Giant Spiders, all armies. That can be useful, especially early on in a campaign. In terms of her personal skill line, she gets an effect duration for spells that debuff an enemy, -4 wins the magic cost for spells that debuff the enemy, and the Spirit Bear ability. And her final skill buffs that Spirit Bear and also reduces combat potential with her attacks and causes fear when fighting against humans. She gets a Winds of Magic cost +24 per power reserve and a -20% Spirit Essence cost for hexes. That is irrelevant, by the way, because you'll have more Spirit Essence than you'll be able to spend. She does get Hag Recruitment in all provinces and Hero Capacity +2 to Hag Witches for Hag Witches in all provinces. She gets Ambush Success Chance, Charge Bonus, and Melee Attack. There are some benefits over here, of course, with her skill line, and there's certainly a level of power. But the primary power that she does have in her own army comes from the fact that all of her units have magical attacks, so that makes them pretty useful against enemies with a lot of physical resistance. And she is good at casting quite a lot of spells and also reducing the winds of magic of the enemy. So multiple benefits over there when it comes to magic. Though the thing is, the magic she's casting does leave something to be desired. Basically, Mother Astankia's own spells are not going to necessarily win the battles for you. They can debuff the enemy or even buff the enemy, if we're talking about Occam's Mind Razor. But when it comes to like pure damage, you're going to need other heroes. Frostmaiden of Tempest, Hag Witch, that you're going to carry with you. Ideally of Shadows, this is the one I started with, just never got around to replacing it. Now, here's where I'd rank Astankia if I were to compare her to all the other Legendary Lords in the game. I would say in terms of power, she's certainly an S rank. S-, begrudgingly given basically, but when you consider the fact that she does have teleportation on the campaign map between the various magical forests, when you do consider she can steal money, when you do consider she can summon a small army, a small rogue army, and also can do the Malediction of Ruin at the end of her quest chain, if you will, which is a fairly significant debuff on a corruption producing race, and you target the entire race. You don't target a particular faction, you target the entire race. In this case, I used it on Norsca. I really should have used it on either the Chaos Dwarves or Skaven to make more use of that. But this really hurts the AI because it causes a lot of attrition, reduces their winds of magic, reduces their growth by a fairly significant amount. The AI, by the way, gets a growth benefit of 120 on Legendary, so you're effectively nullifying the vast majority of that. The AI still will have growth, you won't be able to stop them completely, but it will severely reduce their campaign impact, which can make dealing with the endgame crisis, I imagine, easier because, hey, use it on a faction that produces corruption that you're going to deal with in the endgame crisis, like vampires, for instance. I think that you can use it on that. Not entirely certain, by the way. I just kind of used it on Norse Code, realizing that I couldn't switch it around after I used it once. Just a lesson there. And so you can make it easier to deal with the endgame crisis. Her army can be fun to use in battles, but ultimately what limits her campaign potential are all the issues that Kislev has to deal with. Now here's the thing. I would argue Boris Ursus is better in terms of building a vast empire than she is. She might be better in individual battles, though she is really annoying at that power because having to build a lot of these trinkets, then going to an army over here and selecting the trinkets you're going to use. Look at the list of blessings and curses that I do have over here. It is absurd, and it's better for curses, but blessings have gotten pretty damn absurd. So it ends up it ends up being a hassle. So in terms of strength, certainly an S tier, but in terms of campaign enjoyment, I would say she's either a C or even a D, because there's a lot of hassle to do, and the effects until you get to the Malediction Rune aren't really that powerful. And you're just using them mainly to unlock the Malediction Rune, which certainly is powerful. As someone said that the Malediction Rune seems like it's a really fun effect, but the road to get there is not a fun one. And that's certainly what I would say about Mother Stankia. Lots of annoyances in dealing with her campaign, the limitations on recruiting patriarchs until you make a defensive alliance with one of the factions that controls the special cities of Kislev, the fact that she's actually going to have the hardest time at taking control of the special cities of Kislev, so she's going to miss out on all the juicy landmarks that those cities do have, which do impart a significant amount of power and various options in your campaign, especially Prague, by the way. Because you're missing out on global recruitment duration, all that good stuff. You're missing out on the Griffin Legion. You're missing out on the Hero and Lord recruit rank. So you end up being less powerful if you're playing Mother Stankia than Boris Ursus, because he has Atamans, which do give you those economic benefits. He has the ability to invoke Dash. You have more power in individual battles, but you have less economic power on the campaign than Boris Ursus. Though both Ostankia and Boris Ursus have the same climate suitability, I believe, though Boris Ursus is better at taking the Chaotic Wasteland because he does get devotion per turn from it. Bear that in mind. So, yeah, Ostankia, the least interesting of the Legendary Lords, the least powerful in some ways, actually, though the problem with the power is not necessarily what she lacks, it's what Kislev lacks as a race. In second place, we have Yanbo, the Jade Dragon, who is a Legendary Lord for a race that did get some significant updates, though it's more of a soft rework than a proper rework, or rather it's just a rework of the harmony system for the most part. Now, Cathay was always a decent enough race. Now they've become even more powerful, economic buffs, the change to harmony, ultimately ending up in a buff, especially if you have balanced harmony, giving you that 20% campaign movement range, minus 15% upkeep, and 15% income from all buildings, or getting a recruitment benefit with Yang, or a construction cost, growth, and control benefit, and construction time benefit with Yin. By the way, the previous harmony system was far more similar to Yin than it was to Yang. So that's that's how Cathay is affected, and of course additional units, though with the exception like the Jade and Jet Lions, the Onyx Crowmen don't matter, the drum doesn't really matter. I would argue the usefulness of the drum is limited. I think you need like 4 of them to spread around your entire army, and honestly I'd rather have 4 proper units than 4 proper drums. So that's something to take into account when we're talking about Yanbo. But Cathay did have a fairly solid army and a relatively cheap army, because like you look at Jade Warriors, they're pretty strong, high level of armor, and relatively cheap. They're one of the best tier 1 units in the entire game. Jade Warrior Crossbowmen get the job done. I'd recommend playing Yanbo with the Warband upgrades mod, which I am using over here, because it makes more sense to, upgrade from Jade Warrior Crossbowmen to Jade Warrior Crossbowmen with Shield. I'm not doing it deliberately here because I don't want the upkeep, especially when I'm already in the negative with the income. But still, Cathay is in a better spot. It would be good to have a way of increasing casualty replenishment without relying on the whooshing compass. That is my perspective on that matter. But for the most part, Cafe, in terms of economy, in terms of unit recruitment, in terms of the units, in terms of the campaign situation, is in a solid spot. And Yanbo is in the best spot of all of them because he has more climate options. That makes him, by default, the best legendary lord of Cafe. Then he does have more compass options, though those don't really matter all that much. Like, with the exception of some situations where you might use Dragon River to steal heroes from other factions, I'd say the only one worth using is the Nongchang Basin. Most of the time, though, you'll want to switch between Great Bastion and Celestial Lake for the income benefit there. The significant amount of power that Yanbo does get comes from the steel and stone actions in the Matters of State. So you can get commercial districts, you can get fortress cities, you can get the faction-wide benefit with Command the Lesser Courts. They can basically keep up 100% of the time, given the way steel and stone actions do work. So there's certainly a significant amount of power for him. In terms of faction effects, he gets research rate plus 5% for each provincial capital. So that ends up being quite a bit. It's not 10% that we get from students, but it's actually a fairly substantial benefit that you get. Like, for instance, over here, I have 3 provinces in Lustria, and I have 1 province in Cathay. So that's 4 provinces, that's 20% research rate. That's a fairly decent level at turn 14, and the more you get, the stronger you get. He gets hero capacity plus 2 for Astromancers, which is nice because otherwise you would have to wait until tier 4 in order to increase their hero capacity. So he's all about those Astromancers. He gets 20 diplomatic relations with Cathay, though that's the worst diplomatic relations benefit of Cathay because the others have a bigger one for their special skill line, and you should always get that. And he can get vision by getting trade agreements with factions. Then he gets a Lord Recruit rank faction-wide of plus 5 for Blooded Dragon Shungan. Control, construction cost, construction time benefit, diplomatic relations with humans plus 25 and high elves. Not sure if that includes Cathay, by the way. Minus 30% upkeep in own territory, 5% casualty replenishment, and 30% campaign movement range when in his own territory. That ends up actually being quite a substantial benefit. More hero capacity for Astromancers, and spell intensity of plus 50%. So Yanbo is a very solid choice, and out of the legendary lords that exist, he's much better to play than Mother Estankia in a campaign, and compared to the Changeling, he plays in a much more traditional way on the campaign map as a legendary lord. And I actually think that's for the best. The Changeling campaign can be fun, but certainly it can also end up being frustrating because of the limitations the Changeling has that Yanbo doesn't have. So if you're looking for a more traditional campaign, Yanbo is the best choice in terms of power. He is behind the Changeling, by quite a bit, I might add. But in terms of fun factor, Cathay is fun to use on the campaign, especially as Yanbo, because of the various decisions you have with Matters of State. But when it comes to deciding, when it comes to the battles, there's something that leaves a lot to be desired with Cathay. It can be a bit annoying, or rather boring to play Cathay in battles, because you're basically playing with Jade Warriors and Jade Warrior Crossbowmen, and that is effectively it. So it's limited, but certainly a good deal of fun to use on the campaign map to play Cathay. Finally, and number 1 is the Changeling. Now, I do have some reservations with the Changeling. I think the replayability factor is certainly going to not be all that great for him, but when playing at least one campaign as him, it can be a lot of fun. It can be fun in battles, it can be fun on the campaign map. There's certainly a lot of power. He does have a unique campaign, so whereas Kairos is still left in the ditch by Creative Assembly, the Changeling has one of the most unique campaigns in Total War as a whole. The first real stealth campaign, I would argue. He gets immunity to diplomatic penalties from trespassing. He can replenish and recruit in foreign territory. Armies are hidden in regions with trickster cult building, so enemies may not even detect you in certain regions that have these cults. And these cults work as cave and undercities. You can't easily be wiped out by the AI because you're invisible. Even if you lose all your armies, I might add, you might not lose At least that's what people are showing. I think the AI Changeling can be wiped out if you kill his armies, whereas the player Changeling, not necessarily as much. And you can build these Trickster cults that give you a whole lot of options. You can earn a significant amount of money in the campaign with these cults, like looking at some of the ones that I've built in this particular campaign. You can see that, like, okay, that's a bad example. Like looking at Altdorf over here, I'm earning 2,000 from Altdorf. I'm earning 1,000 from Ubersreich. I'm earning only 100 from Eilhart, but Eilhart just basically got blasted into oblivion, or 300 from Gurrenburg. So there's certainly a lot of economic potential if you're playing the Changeling in the campaign. And you have this dynamic where you go to war with factions, but you don't want to wipe them out because you will earn more money if you keep them alive, as opposed to building bloodied vaults all over the place. Your undercities, your cults, can't be destroyed even if the settlement is razed, which means that they'll always stay. So when a new faction, a new victim shows up, if you will, and takes over a settlement, you'll still be able to benefit economically from that settlement when another faction ultimately builds it up. That may take a while, though. Now, the Changeling's main mechanic is his ability to assume the form of legendary lords that he's either beaten a battle or he's allied. So there's certainly a significant amount of potential over here, and certainly a lot of fun, by the way, to be had in battles, because like you can go from Vlad to Grimgor to Trog to Festus to Gortuz to Lokir to Karl Franz, Catherine, Lewin, Isabella. Those are just the ones that I've unlocked. The Dragons in Cafe, Teclis, if you so desire. Hell, I don't think I've played as Teclis in a very long time. Maybe I should play as Teclis as the Changeling. Just an idea. His skills buff that. And we're not just talking about the skills in the upper part, by the way, which give you a significant amount of upkeep benefits, casualty replenishment benefits, guardian ability for lords and embedded heroes in his armies. We're also talking about the fact that when he transforms into a lord, he gets weapon strength, melee attack, melee defense. He can get ammo and reload time reduction if you want to go for a ranged lord and hero. That's your choice. I would not recommend it. But various other benefits. So, for instance, like, Red Hot Jape, you get the Form's battle abilities when using Formless Horror. And you can get you can get access to their spells ultimately. So there's a lot of power with the Changeling. There's a lot of fun to be had in both battle and the campaign map. You really feel like you play a troll. Like, you're not there to defeat anyone. You're not there to annihilate entire regions in the campaign map, though you certainly will be fighting a lot of battles. You're there to go in to a theater of operations, be it the Empire, Norska Kislev, Ulthuan, do your objectives, get significant campaign benefits. Like, for instance, over here I got 10 Winds of Magic Power Reserve for all armies. I got 10 armor and 10 base weapon damage for all armies. It ends up being a fairly substantial benefit, and these end up stacking on top of another. So these are all the benefits that I've unlocked through various schemes and grand schemes that I've done. Ends up being quite substantial. I would like it more if the grand schemes end up being more significant, because right now it is a bit funny when you're like, oh, let's steal the Black Pyramid of Nagash and let's bring it to Cathay, or let's breach the Great Bastion over here and unleash dozens of armies of demons across Cathay, or help the Greenskins rebel against the Chaos Dwarfs. But ultimately, the armies you're spawning will not amount to much of anything, really. And yes, the Black Pyramid of Nagash is still called that over here, but that's just, well, they didn't want to change the settlement, because you might play a co-op campaign, so you can, I imagine, still get access to it. But it is a fun mechanic. It's not necessarily as good as it could be, or as impactful as it could be, but there's still certainly something very unique and something very fun. In terms of power, well, the Changeling can't easily be beaten. His army is just as powerful as the Warriors of Chaos have in their armies. Which means that, yeah, Tzeentch Warriors of Chaos, while certainly not the best, Tzeentch Warriors of Chaos, Chosen of Chaos, Forsaken, Sangors, and all the demonic units end up being fairly substantial. So you can win battles just as easily as the Warriors of Chaos. You don't have the problem of Kairos, who has poor casualty replenishment. You have great casualty replenishment. Like over here, I just have from the Trickster rewards 20%, but I also have the Way of the Trickster, so I have 30% casualty replenishment. So there's certainly a great deal of fun to be had in this campaign. Lots of potential, lots of power in terms of magic, in terms of army abilities, in terms of campaign abilities. You also have a teleportation ability, which has always been great for Be'lakor and Oxyato to use on the campaign map, and now you have access to that as well as the Changeling. So certainly the highlight of the DLC, and I think Creative Assembly knows it, that's why they put him in the launch trailer. They put his intro cinematic in the launch trailer for pretty obvious reasons. It does seem to be the Legendary Lord that they put the most effort in. It is disappointing that Kairos didn't get any changes, but the way they handled him is certainly S tier. And it's S tier in terms of power, it's S tier in terms of fun. It may not be S tier in terms of replayability, though you can always go and, like let's say over here in this particular campaign, I chose to go for the Darklands and Grand Cafe, but maybe I could go in Lustria, for instance, or maybe I can go in Naggaroth as another example, or Ulthuan. Those are just some of the choices you do have as the Changeling. Now, fun fact, if you're playing Mother Estancia, you do want to complete your final battle. As a Changeling, you don't really care about the final battle. You're not going to gain anything from it. So you can actually wait, though, to be fair, you probably would want to complete it as quickly as possible, because it does give you that long campaign victory condition, so at least you're getting that Lord Recruit rank, but you're not getting something like the Malediction of Ruin in your campaign. Also, fun fact, you can take the Sword of Cain and you don't care at all about the downsides. I mean, the diplomatic downsides, sure. The control downside, irrelevant, suffice it to say, because you don't hold settlements, so it's like free Sword of Cain, really powerful. I have it on Sarfurel over here. The amount of power you get without the downsides generally factions get with regards to this power is pretty ridiculous. Because one of the things that quite a lot of powerful factions have as a downside, either they need to hold a lot of territory, or they have annoying vassals to deal with. The exception, of course, the Warriors of Chaos are extremely powerful, but keep in mind, you do have to herd the cat, so to speak, with vassals. You don't have that dynamic as a Changeling. You can get vassals, but you don't have to get a ridiculous amount of vassals as the Warriors of Chaos. And you have a better economy, actually, than the Warriors of Chaos, and a lot more fun in the campaign. So that would be it. My personal perspective, I dislike playing Mother Estancia. There's just a lot of hassle to go through. Yanbo is probably the most replayable of all the campaigns, though not necessarily the most interesting. The Changeling is the most interesting character. He's the most interesting campaign, and I'd probably recommend playing it once if you do decide to get the DLC, which I don't think is a great idea at this current price. It's rewarding bad behavior from Creative Assembly, but it can certainly be a lot of fun playing at least once. Replayability may not necessarily be there, however. Keep that in mind. Senior, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications.